None. Questions by members of the public?
None, Chairman.
Questions from members?
None, Chairman.
Any relevant updates to government by guidance or legislation? Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. No, there are today.
Right, okay, well, we'll move on to the meat of tonight's meeting. And the first one is applications, subject to public speaking. And the first one is WA 2021 03018, the land at Hawthorns, Hale Road Farm. An outline application with all matters reserved except for access, the erection of 65 dwellings, including 40% affordable housing, public open space, car park, landscaping infrastructure, and new vehicle access following demolition of existing dwelling and outbuildings. Ruth to present.
Thank you, Chair, and speaking members. Just to let you know that Richard Cooper, the County High Authority Officer, is also attending this meeting. He's on Zoom. He will say a few words about the proposal after I've done my presentation and is also available for questions. I just wanted to draw your attention to the update sheet that was circulated yesterday. There was quite a lengthy comment from Farnham Town Council in relation to an appeal court ruling. We have had consideration of the Gladman case that Farnham Town Council set out in their objection. Within the Gladman case that was in March 2021, it was argued by the developer that in the tilted balance, development plan policies did not apply. So the Court of Appeal affirmed that in the tilted balance, regard should be had to development plan policies. Officers are of the view that they have taken this approach within the committee report. They have had full regard to the development plan policies and considered the degree of conflict with them, but also balanced this against other material considerations, one of which being the MPPF. So we feel that our approach is consistent with how we previously handled the tilted balance and is in accordance with the Gladman case. There was also reference in a representation to a Newman appeal court ruling, and this ruling confirmed that design-related policy can be relevant to the determination of an outline planning application. Design considerations are set out on pages 32 to 34 of this report, so we feel that the report accords with that ruling. Just also to say there have been 4 additional representations since the update sheet was produced, but these don't add anything to news representations that have already been covered off in the agenda report.
Yes, Councillor Dixon.
Sorry, I'm just going back one paragraph to where you said that you have looked at the Gladman case, but that didn't seem to come into consideration because of NPPF. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that?
So, it does come into consideration in that it explains how to apply the tilted balance and confirms that development plan policies are relevant when considering the tilted balance. What I'm saying is that having read the Gladman position, I feel that we have done everything that is expected of us as set out in that court ruling. So we have considered the development plan policies when considering the merits of the application, and then as required by the MPPF, which is a material consideration, we have also balanced the benefits against the conflict with a development plan.
I'd like, could you just go on with your presentation, please?
Okay. So I think I mentioned 4 additional representations that we received that don't really cover any additional ground to what's set out in the report. So I will get on to take you through the proposal. So you can see it's a T-shaped site and it's on the edge of Farnham settlement. So this green line here denotes the Farnham settlement boundary. So it is located in countryside. You've got the Six Bells roundabout here and the Six Bells public house here. It's an outline planning application with all matters reserved except for access. So the matters that aren't under consideration tonight are appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. This aerial photograph provides you with a bit more context. So you can see very clearly the line of the settlement here. There is also a footpath that runs along here, which is called the Scholars Way. You have Farnham Park, located to the west of the site, which is an area of historic landscape and a historic park and garden. Should also point out this is the Leonard Cheshire Centre, so that's a residential care home for children with learning disabilities. And the site is located in an area of great landscape value and an area of high landscape value and sensitivity as designated in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. So this aerial just helps you get your bearings of the site. You can see the existing house to be demolished here. At the moment, access to the house is via a shared driveway here. So this driveway continues up to the Leonard Cheshire Centre, but it also does a dogleg round to the dwelling. The site is a combination of house, garden, paddocks and meadowland. And you have the Nadder stream that runs along the northern boundary. There's also a line of beech trees that front along the Hale Road. So I've got some site photographs. So photograph A is effectively the frontage of the site along Hale Road when approaching it from the south. Photograph B is again the site when approaching it from the north. And photograph C is taken from the start of the driveway into Hawthorns itself, looking into the northwest corner of the site. Photograph D is taken from the shared driveway, and you can see a line of conifers that lines the driveway into Hawthorns. Photograph E is looking from the shared driveway and towards sort of like the bottom T of the site. And photograph F is effectively looking into it's taken from the driveway of the house, looking to the northeastern corner of the site. Photo G is taken from the driveway, looking to the towards the sort of southern boundary, and sorry, not the southern boundary, the western boundary and the northwest corner of the site. Photograph H taken from the centre of the site, again looking towards the western boundary, and photograph I. What you can see there is the access driveway that goes through to the Leonard Cheshire Centre, and this area here is the bottom of the T of the development site. And then the final photograph is taken from the garden of Hawthorns and looking towards the western boundary. So this slide shows the indicative master plan, and it is only indicative, bearing in mind that this is an outline application with layout and design matters reserved, but it does give you a good indication of how a development could look. So we have a new access coming in directly off Hale Road. There would be a provision of an area of public open space on the northern part of the site. And within that public open space, there's shown a leap, and the sort of shaded blue areas here are attenuation basins in connection with the suds. And there's also a small car parking area for 5 cars, because the idea would be that this would be public open space, so that would be public car parking area. So the development really focuses in the central and southern parts of the site, and there's quite a mix of housing proposed. So we've got 2-storey flatted buildings here and here, and there are some small runs of terraces and some semi-detached and detached. There is a footpath and cycleway that would run within the site with potential to connect through to the Hale Trail, which is in Farnham Park. The proposal would include a 40% provision of affordable housing, which equates to 26 houses, and the breakdown of that is 19 for affordable rent and 7 first homes, and that would be secured via a Section 106 agreement. So these are some indicative visuals. So that the first one gives you an idea of how a street scene could look. The second one is a visual that is taken from the western side of the site, looking across the open space and giving you an idea of the relationship between the houses and the public open space that's proposed. There are some highways works associated with the development that the County Highway Authority have worked hard to secure. So I've mentioned the new access to the site. There would also be a 3 metre wide cycleway and pathway along the western side of Hale Road, going from the Six Bells roundabout down to the Six Bells public house. We have given consideration of that aspect of the scheme to the trees. You've seen from the photos that there are some substantial trees that front the site, and we've consulted the tree officer. And through special methods of construction, we feel that a lot of those trees would be retained, but we do acknowledge that some may be lost. So there is quite a lot of relevant planning history, and it is a significant material consideration when assessing this application. So in 2017, an outline planning application was submitted for up to 65 dwellings, and again, it was all matters reserved other than access. This application also proposed open space at the northern end of the site, which was originally proposed as Sangland, but during appeal, it was concluded that it could alternatively be public open space, and they could make a contribution towards the SPA to mitigate the potential impacts there. So the application was refused on 8 grounds, and the decision was appealed. And by the time the appeal came around, we were down to 2 reasons for refusal, because all other reasons for refusal had been addressed effectively and agreed between the applicant and the council. So the reasons for refusal related to the impact of the development on countryside beyond the green belt and the area for landscape value, recognising conflict with the development plan, and also that insufficient evidence had been provided to demonstrate that the number and density of the units proposed was acceptable and wouldn't result in a cramped and crowded development that would be out of character with the area. So the inspector's appeal conclusions are highly material to the consideration of this application. In considering the 2 reasons for refusal, the second one, which related to the quantum of development, the inspector felt that the quantum of development was acceptable and didn't uphold the appeal on this basis. What the inspector did conclude was that there was conflict with the development plan, that the site was not an appropriate location for housing because it was outside the built-up area boundary, so it was at odds with and undermined the neighbourhood plan. However, he accorded only limited weight to this due to the lack of 5-year housing land supply at the time, and because also, at that point, the final neighbourhood plan did not allocate sufficient land for housing to meet the targets in Local Plan Part 1. He recognised that there was a degree of harmful urbanisation that would conflict with the development plan, but this was not considered in his view to be significant due to the open space that was provided at the northern end of the site. So his conclusion was that although there was a conflict with the development plan, on the tilted balance, the conflict was outweighed by other material considerations, the most significant being the provision of market and affordable housing. One thing that's very important to note is at the time, paragraph 14 of the MPPF was not engaged, and this paragraph affords the neighbourhood plans an extra layer of protection if they're more than 2 years old. So in those circumstances, where the tilted balance applies, development that conflicts with the neighbourhood plan is likely to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. But as this paragraph is not engaged, on the tilted balance, the inspector concluded that the appeal should be allowed and permission be granted. So the application was called in by the Secretary of State, who then gave it further consideration, and he issued his decision in May 2020, by which time the final neighbourhood plan had been reviewed and the revised plan had been made. So the Secretary of State also recognised conflict with the development plan, again acknowledging that it's not an appropriate location for housing because of it being outside the built-up area boundary, and he attached moderate weight to this rather than the inspector who attached limited weight. And that was because of the fact that the final neighbourhood plan now allocated sufficient land to meet Farnham's housing targets. And he also attached moderate weight against the limited landscape impacts. The difference in circumstance between the inspector's decision and the Secretary of State's decision was that paragraph 14 was now engaged because the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan had recently been made. And that meant that the extra layer of protection afforded by paragraph 14 was engaged. And on that basis, the Secretary of State concluded that the adverse impacts of granting permission for a proposal that conflicts with a recently made neighbourhood plan where paragraph 14 is engaged will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against policies in the NPPF taken as a whole. So on that basis, the Secretary of State dismissed the appeal. So this gives you an idea of the similarities and differences between the refused scheme and the current proposal. So you can see they are similar in many ways in terms of where they focus the development for housing, i.e. in the centre and at the southern end of the site. One of the main differences is that 5 dwellings here are taken, sort of moved and incorporated within the development, within the centre and the southern ends of the site, and that's a direct response to something that the appeal inspector raised on the refused scheme. So rather than those houses, you have, oh sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You have the leap instead. And there are also, what this master plan shows, but again, it's indicative that there are some existing trees here that would be retained under the current proposal that weren't being retained under the previous scheme. So this slide sets out the key considerations when considering the development. First question being, is it in accordance with the development plan? So historically, both an appeal inspector and the Secretary of State have considered that the location of development isn't in accordance with the development plan because it is outside the settlement boundary, and this is a negative against the scheme. It has also been established that there are harmful landscape impacts, but both the Secretary of State and the appeal inspector considered these to be limited. With regards to highways, I've said that we have the County Highway Authority here to answer any questions. They've reviewed this proposal. They consider that it's acceptable with regard to traffic generation and highway safety. And there were no highways issues that were raised by either the appeal inspector or the Secretary of State under the previous application. In terms of market housing provision, there's a good range of market housing, which is a substantial benefit. And in terms of affordable housing provision, there's a 40% provision as opposed to policy requirements of 30%. And again, the provision of affordable housing is a substantial benefit. Through contributions, the proposal wouldn't have a harmful impact on the SPA because contributions would be made towards SAN. And in relation to biodiversity, the applicants have set out how they can improve the biodiversity of the site because at the moment there is species poor grassland there, and through improving the variety of grasslands and planting more trees within the open space at the northern end of the site, they feel that they can improve the ecological value of it. So material considerations that I've gone through at length are the previous appeal inspector's decision and the Secretary of State's decision, and they have had quite a bearing on the recommendation made on this application this evening. So there is a material change now between the Secretary of State's decision and the circumstances we currently find ourselves in, and that is that when the Secretary of State made his decision, paragraph 14 of the NPPF was engaged, and therefore the neighbourhood plan was afforded an extra layer of protection. Paragraph 14 of the NPPF is no longer engaged because the neighbourhood plan is more than 2 years old. And in those circumstances, when the benefits and harms are balanced against each other with greater weighting towards the benefits, it's considered that harmful impacts of development do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Ruth? Right, we have 4 public speakers on this particular item, and I'm starting off with Catherine Powell, who's an objection. Catherine, please, come to this desk. And when you start speaking, you have 4 minutes.
Chair,
Yes.
I thought you said that Richard Cooper was going to present after Ruth had finished her presentation.
I think you need to answer questions, Ruth, or you need to answer questions, Ruth. Richard.
Richard was going to.
Oh, was he? Okay. Well, you do. Okay.
All right.
So, okay, Richard.
Thank you, Chair.
Hello, Richard.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for inviting me along this evening. In highway terms, there are no material changes to this application to the previous ones that have been submitted for this site. And as Ruth has said, there was no objection upheld at appeal on highway grounds. In terms of this current application, the Highway Authority did originally raise concerns regarding the technical information that had been submitted to support the application, and also the information that had been submitted to show the sustainable transport improvements that could be delivered and be maximised as part of the development. And this resulted in an objection being raised by the Highway Authority in February of this year. In response to that, as is often the case, the applicant prepared additional technical highway and transport information, and this was submitted to us. The key issue being the submission of up-to-date traffic survey data for the highway network within the vicinity of the site. This was needed to understand whether the data that was submitted in support of the previous applications was still robust. And whether that could be relied upon to model the impact of the development in traffic terms. In fact, this data confirms that traffic flows are still below the levels that were forecast back when the previous application was submitted in 2017. And the 2022 flows that have been recorded by the Highway Authority also show that across Waverley and the county, traffic flows are 5%, but still 5% below pre-pandemic levels. So the updated survey data that the applicant has provided, the Highway Authority is satisfied that means that the original assessment that was undertaken is still robust in terms of understanding the traffic impact of the site. It is acknowledged that there is queuing and delay on the network at peak times within the vicinity of the site. But the Highway Authority's view is that an additional 65 houses generating an estimated 34 two-way movements during those peak periods will have no material impact on traffic capacity or those junctions, and certainly not be severe, which is the test in the MPPF. Turning to the second issue is the proposal maximising the sustainable transport opportunities, which is the second key test in the local plan, part 1, and the MPPF. The Highway Authority thinks this is a good sustainable site, being a 15-minute walk to the town centre or a 5-minute cycle ride. There are good quality bus stops within 400 metres of the centre of the site, which is the recommended walking distance set down by the Department for Transport. The mitigation that Ruth referred to is designed primarily to maximise sustainable transport opportunities, with the new 3-metre wide shared footway cycleway linking the Toucan crossing at the Six Bells roundabout and the Scholars Greenway adjacent to the Six Bells pub. We also have a new crossing on Hale Road. This will be an uncontrolled crossing, but with a central pedestrian refuge. And this will provide safe access to the site, but also for existing people using Hale Road. There's also the new 3-metre wide link through the site, linking Hale Road with the Hale Trail Greenway in Farnham Park. And the exact connection from the boundary of the site can obviously be determined at any reserve matters stage. So, finally, in terms of sustainability, we have a 106 contribution of £100 per dwelling towards the purchase of bus or train tickets or a bicycle, which would be managed through the travel plan statement for the site. I hope that's a helpful summary, and I'm happy to take any other questions as we move on.
Very much, Richard. Jenny, we have as public speakers first.
Can I ask a question?
No, well, we usually take the public speakers. You can ask a question after the public speakers.
Oh, this is very short. Can I ask a question?
Oh, I'd rather you do that. You'll be online after the public speakers. Right. Catherine.
Good evening, members. I strongly object to this proposal, as do many others in Farnham, and I would urge you all to refuse this application. This is a significant residential development outside the built-up area boundary in an area of high landscape and biodiversity value and sensitivity. It's not an allocated site in either the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, Local Plan Part 1 or the emerging Local Plan Part 2, and is therefore contrary to various policies that protect the countryside, the environment and our community. The officer's report states that the borough as a whole is falling short of the 5-year housing land supply and that the tilting balance should be engaged. What of recent case law? The High Court dismissed a bid by land promoter Gladman to overturn 2 appeal decisions that blocked its plans to build additional homes in a ruling that gives primacy to the development plan policy and clarifies that where a local authority lacks a 5-year housing supply, grants of permission should not be automatic. The officer's report states the development is sustainable, the harm arising not significant and outweighed by the benefits. This is not substantiated by the report. The Farnham Neighbourhood Plan and Waverley Local Plan Part 1 have been approved as sustainable. What impacts on sustainable development? There are other factors that must be taken into consideration that are ignored in the officer's report. 11,210 houses were allocated in Waverley's Local Plan Part 1, 2,780 of them in Farnham, nearly 25%. The policy on housing allocation would be breached by this application being approved. Farnham is delivering against its plan with a significant number of ongoing and recently completed developments, including Crondall Lane, sites in Webburn and Bagshot Lee, Folly Heights and Brightwells. In addition to this, there are almost 6,000 houses built or being built within 5 kilometres of this site in Hampshire, Rushmore and Hart and in Guildford. Significantly more than Local Plan Part 1 and the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan were developed and approved. This has not been assessed for sustainability. More houses in the surrounding area make more impact than the house. The impact of more houses in Farnham is even greater for all the related facilities, schools, hospitals, sports facilities, water and sewage. Homes being built as part of the Aldershot urban expansion will be infinitely more affordable than any associated with this development. So I would argue there is no need for affordable development outside the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. The officer's report does not look at the full range of issues that make a site sustainable. It does not replicate the rigour applied in the development of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. There is no other area of Waverley being burdened with this level of development in such a small geographic area, most of which is outside of Waverley. Is this being looked at cooperatively? Is more development sustainable? The evidence on the ground says no. Waverley seem pretty determined to automatically approve all developments, ignoring the policy on housing allocation within Waverley because of the lack of the 5-year housing supply. Across the whole of Waverley, there are 4 other substantial applications in the northeast of this site within 1.5 kilometres. Collectively, they would treble the allocation in this area. This is not sustainable. Where will it stop? The shortfall must be addressed by using the policy in Waverley Local Plan Part 1 for each settlement. Thank you for your time, and can I please ask that you refuse this application?
On the nose. Right, next we have is a Douglas Bond. Well, who else here? Douglas, come over to this desk. And you have 4 minutes when you start speaking as well.
Can I tap? Does the microphone work?
No. Talk loud enough, you'll be heard.
Okay, thank you, Chair and members. As you've heard, the previous Secretary of State appeal decision for this site is relevant to the determination of this application. In particular, the inspector confirmed that the proposal would only have a limited effect on the countryside. Significantly, the Secretary of State agreed with that conclusion. That conclusion also equally applies to this application. Moreover, the appeal decision confirmed that there were no other objections, such as, for instance, highways, that could lead to refusal, a further important consideration. The only reason the appeal was dismissed related to the then approved neighbourhood plan and the importance given to its contents and policies in line with the requirements of the NPPF paragraph 14. However, and as you've heard from Ruth, since the determination of the appeal, that paragraph and by definition the level of importance given to the neighbourhood plan and its policies by the NPPF no longer applies. Therefore, a different balancing exercise is to be applied to the determination of this application, noting that the conclusions of the Secretary of State on countryside and the absence of any other harms or reasons for refusal still apply. To reiterate, the Secretary of State found the proposal to be acceptable in many respects. Whilst harms to the countryside and policy conflicts were identified, these only attracted limited weight given that the site was and still is so well enclosed. Those judgments continue to apply and cannot be ignored where they were given by the Secretary of State in light of the Council's objections. Moreover, the benefits of the proposals remain. These include providing much needed new homes, including affordable housing that exceeds your policy requirements. The sustainable location site was also accepted as a benefit. This proposal is also an improvement on the previous scheme, development now focused on the brownfield part of the site and the 2 semi-domestic paddles. The more attractive part of the site are now free from development and proposed a new public accessible and well-landscaped open space that will cover almost a third of the site. Trees previously proposed to be removed are now to be retained. As a result, these benefits, which the Secretary of State confirmed were significant in the case of the appeal, but which are now improved upon in this application, outweigh the limited and accepted degree of harm that arises. Accordingly, when applying the tilted balance in the NPPF, which we have to do, any adverse impacts established as limited in any event do not come close to significantly and demonstrably outweighing the many recognised benefits of the scheme. The proposal is therefore accepted in the planning balance. Now, I appreciate the proposal is not a popular one, and this is a difficult decision for members. However, the planning system highlights the importance of delivering sufficient homes in the right places. The previous appeal decision confirmed that this site is a good one, with limited impacts on the countryside and on planning policy. Accordingly, if any site is to be released to meet these important housing needs against the backdrop of the 5-year housing land supply deficit, then this is it. Having been tested at appeal against the local plan and neighbourhood plan policies and objections from the authority and residents. The comprehensive officer's report confirms, consistent with the inspector and Secretary of State's findings, that all other aspects of the scheme are acceptable and accord with policy. So to conclude, unlike many other applications which do not have the benefit of an inspector and Secretary of State's conclusions, also noting the various improvements to the scheme since that decision, this application can and should be granted. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Right, next over to you is Councillor Jerry Hyman, who is speaking. You've got 4 minutes, Councillor Hyman.
Sorry, Chairman, finger wasn't working properly. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I do wish to address simply the matter of the principle of this development. I'm afraid the information provided to you by Mr. Bond just now is not correct, because the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply. The reason I'm attending is I attended the Joint Strategic Partnership Board meeting, that's for the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area this morning, and Councillor Martin Darcy of Waverley Borough Council was also there. We can confirm to you that Natural England confirmed to the meeting that they do not have any evidence of the effectiveness of the mitigation strategy. They certainly do not have the evidence that is required in law and in the National Planning Policy and Planning Practice Guidance on Appropriate Assessment that has been published since the 2018 People Over Wind and Sweetman ruling. So National Planning Policy Framework National Planning Policy Framework paragraph 182, which tells you that in the case where there is no appropriate assessment, the principle of sustainable development does not apply. The tilted balance does not apply. That applies here. The principle does not apply to this development, and Councillor Darcy will confirm that we've been told we cannot have an appropriate assessment. Whatever anybody tells you, the information necessary is not available as of this morning. That is the latest news. So that's absolute fact. The document which you have on the perhaps in front of you, but certainly on the application record, which is called AA Pro Forma. It is not an appropriate assessment. Taking money as a sang tariff does not equate to an appropriate assessment. That was the whole purpose of the People Over Wind ruling, which we have to abide by. So this development must be refused on grounds of no appropriate assessment of impacts on the spa, and of course the policy departures which are in your documents in front of you, and which I'm quite sure other members will highlight themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Right, the last public speaker is Award Councillor Andy MacLeod, and as Award Councillor, you have 4 minutes now, and 4 minutes at the end if you so wish. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee, and good evening, members. First of all, I'd like to say I think that Catherine Powell, speaking on behalf of the objectors, has made a very strong case for refusal of this application. As a local member, I agree with her objections and with her conclusion that the application should be rejected. However, I have to say that it's not always easy for the committee to decide on applications like this. The arguments on the other side that the committee has to take into account. The planning officer's recommendation for approval must always be taken seriously. Waverley's current lack of a 5-year housing supply, which brings the NPPF tilted balance in favour into account, allowing the development that comes into play. The stated benefit of the application in this case being 65 new dwellings, including 24 affordable houses. So I'd like to talk about these three things. On the first 2 points, both the NPPF and the Court of Appeal decision in the Gladman case make it clear that even where the tilted balance applies, the harms arising from the development can still be judged as outweighing the benefits. It's still a matter of a planning judgment by this committee, whether or not you agree. In other words, you have the right to refuse this appeal or allow it as you wish. You're not bound by the tilted balance completely. It's still a matter of judgment, and a matter of judgment for yourselves. The objectors, including the Town Council and many individual objectors, have identified a whole series of individual harms, which I don't have time to go through here, but I would like to mention 3. This is not an approved development site in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. It's outside the built-up area boundary, and it's not compliant with local plan policy FNP1, New Development and Conservation, and policy FNP14, Housing Site Allocations. The site is located in the countryside beyond the green belt and is an area of great landscape value. It is also an area of high landscape value and sensitivity within the Farm Neighbourhood Plan. Thirdly, these 65 houses are not actually required or necessary to meet either Waverley's target of 11,210 houses in the local plan, or Farnham's target within the neighbourhood plan as part of the local plan, sitting alongside the local plan of 2,780 houses. So these are 3 things that 3 of the main things I think the committee has to take into account. I'd like to lastly address this idea of the benefit. The benefit is stated to be the 65 new houses. for Farnham. But I have to point out, as has been pointed out by many objectors, these houses are just not necessary for Farnham, and they're not actually a benefit for Farnham. Farnham has got a great deal of Farnham abuts 3 other local authority areas, 4 actually: Guildford, Rushmore, Hart, and East Hants. In these areas, as Catherine Powell has pointed out, 6,000 houses are already being built, and 20,000 houses are due to be built within the local plan periods of these authorities. And so these houses are just not necessary. They're not a benefit to Farnham, and as we know, we won't get the necessary infrastructure. So my time is up, Chairman. So I've finished by saying I'd recommend that the committee does not approve this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. You have another 4 minutes at the end, Councillor McLeod, if you so wish.
Thank you,
Right.
Chairman.
The question, Councillor Martin, you had a question for Rich Cooper.
Oh, yes, sorry. Going back to Richard Cooper, it's proposed to widen the pavement to accommodate a cycleway. But during the appeal, we were told that the ground levels of adjoining trees made that impossible. How is it impossible now?
Richard.
Thank you, Councillor. Not only is obviously the existing footway being widened to 3 metres, but to accommodate the access and the right turn lane, the whole carriageway was obviously being widened as well, and that will all take place within highway land. There's trees that will obviously be affected, and Ruth covered that earlier. But the Highway Authority never said that at the appeal that widening on that side was not possible. It is possible, and obviously to implement any works there would need to be a detailed technical design done, which is the normal process.
So the technical design has not been done yet, but we're asking for planning permission for this application.
The technical design always follows any planning consent, which is delivered under what's called Section 278 process of the Highways Act. The planning is assessing the layout and safety, and then the engineering detail, as I say, that is normal process.
Thank you.
Councillor Hess.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Richard, am I correct in recalling you said earlier, can you hear me all right, Richard?
Yes, you can, Councillor Hess, thank
Yeah.
you.
Am I right in recalling that you said earlier that traffic is about 5% below pre-pandemic levels?
Yes, I actually spoke to our traffic survey team today just to get the latest, and that they've actually just finished doing some surveys in Farnham actually, and
I'd like to ask a question associated with that.
Sure.
The pandemic is fast receding, although I think people are still coming down with it, but as a pandemic which is affecting people's jobs and transportation, we're moving out through now back into a post-pandemic era, hopefully. And I really find that very interesting, why that 5% below pre-pandemic is relevant, given all the development all around us. Guildford, Rushmore, all their new developments are piling in, and a lot will come through this area. We already know that the traffic lights at St John's and the lower part of the Upper Hill Road is a choke point already, has been for years, and it's only getting worse. So I really find it very interesting how highways think it's okay.
Thank you for the question. Just to clarify, the reason why the updated traffic surveys have been done was to compare those, almost, I suppose, a sensitivity test to the surveys that were originally done for this site back in 2017, and that is showing that those, as I say, those current flows we're having today, as you say, are still below pre-pandemic. So the point I'm trying to make is we're actually modelling this this impact of this current application on the higher traffic flows pre-pandemic, which I feel is obviously a robust. We're effectively modelling, assuming traffic flows will increase again to what they were pre-pandemic. It was just mainly an observation that what the applicant has provided is consistent with the surveys that the County Council have undertaken.
Councillor Neil.
I don't want to labour it too long because it's been talked about, but I just wanted to emphasise again what Councillor Martin has just said, that highway there and the civil drawings that are enclosed with these papers. There's a very steep embankment from the pavement to the west of that highway, and the drawings don't show how it really accommodates this 3 metre wide plus a wider carriageway in that space. So I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't really answer the question, I don't think, the drawings that are there. Thank you.
Yes, I know we're talking about highways and what have you, but I have one observation to make on the layout of this scheme, and that is the affordable and first homes that have been stuck on the edge of this development, which I think is great disappointment, because we always say that we want integration of our affordable and first homes, shared ownership or whatever, and this is ghettoising them once again on the end of the development. And for that very reason, I would not vote for this application, because we have gone through this time and again that we don't want ghettoising of shared ownership or first time or any other can't think of the word I want to use, but I'm very disappointed to see this, and it is something that we as a council have always been against allowing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I would add that this is an outline application, more. Do you want to say anything?
Yes, sorry, just to clarify, that as this is an outline application, we're not fixing tonight the location of the affordable housing. And actually on page 42 of my report, it is recognised that there's an excessive concentration of units at the southern end of the site, and that a greater spread of affordable housing units throughout the site could and should be achieved, which would be considered at the reserved matters stage. I think the only other thing that I would like to comment on is the idea that the housing shouldn't be considered as a benefit because Farnham has allocated sufficient sites for housing in its neighbourhood plan. I just would refer you back to the appeal decision, the inspector's appeal report, and the Secretary of State's decision, and they're both quite clear that the provision of market and affordable housing is a benefit.
Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have concerns that this might not be a sustainable development. When I read the Planning and Purchase Act 2004, it talks about the desirability of the design and the requirement to achieve sustainable development. It then refers me to the national policies. When I look to the national policies, presumption in favour of sustainable development, I find that if the LPA are correct and we do not have a 5-year supply, we then go to a discretionary decision where in item D2 it says any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the framework taken as a whole. As far as I can see, these houses are not required, therefore there are not significant benefits. I also have the question as regards to whether the developer is a site sponsor or a developer. If the officer could answer that question, please.
I think answers I don't know, and it wouldn't be relevant to my consideration of the application.
Because I think in the essentially it says the planners officers work with the developer, So if it's not a developer, why are we working with the site sponsor?
It has no bearing on the consideration of the planning
So
application.
why are we told in the information given to us that we work with the developer? Because for me, a developer is completely different to a site sponsor.
Well, Chris, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, really just to reiterate what Ruth is saying, who the applicant is not a material consideration, and I would strongly urge you not to make a decision based on whether it's a developer or a site or somebody else that isn't a developer. It really, that wouldn't, that we've got to consider on planning merits. And yeah, thank you, Chair.
Councillor James.
Oh, thank you. As Ruth said to Councillor Key, that the way the houses were being mixed out of the layout was for reserved matters. Can you then explain that if should members allow this to go ahead, that condition 9 and condition 13 are very specific, that you've actually got to say you've got to have an electrical charging point outside this house, you've got to have secure parking facilities, all that would be in reserved matters. Why would it be in the conditions now where we're only actually having access and what should be, which is actually what we're here? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would just say that what we're doing with these conditions is establishing the principle of what we're expecting to see delivered on the site. So it's not bringing forward details, it's essentially just ensuring that principle. So in condition 9, ensuring that provision of secure cycle parking is provided. And what was the other condition, sorry?
It was 13.
Charging points.
Charging points.
Yeah, so really they're matters of principle which we want to establish at the outset, that those will be provided, and any reserved matter scheme should be able to incorporate those requirements without any difficulty.
Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor MacLeod and other people have said, that this is very, very difficult for all sorts of reasons. And when the agenda first arrived, I revisited all the evidence base, every single bit, went right back to 2012, which is when we started the neighbourhood plan, to look at the processes and see why the public came up with the plan that it did. Because the neighbourhood plan was written by the residents of Farnham, and we must never forget that. As everyone knows, site selection, I hope you all know, was delegated completely to the Farnham neighbourhood plan in local plan part 1. And it was agreed at a recent appeal that in the context of this site, local plan part 2 is almost immaterial, largely immaterial, because it doesn't allocate any sites to Farnham. Farnham has, if you like, a complete development plan, in as much as it has local plan part 1 and it has the neighbourhood plan, both of which are adopted documents. The site selection process that we employed was a robust process. It's been tested at 2 examinations in public, 2 referendums, and it was also challenged in the courts by a consortium of developers. It has proved to be robust, the court found in our favour, and unusually awarded costs to both the borough and the town council. But in order to challenge our process yet further, because we do want to be robust in our processes when we're allocating sites, the team commissioned HDA, Hankinson Duckett Associates, to prepare a separate Farnham character landscape assessment in 2018, because we had been relying on evidence from Waverley, which was not as specific to the town. It was more a capacity document than an actual character assessment. Every single site was revisited for the review. Old sites, new sites, every single site was revisited and reviewed against new evidence of the HDA landscape assessment, and also against the list of criteria, which has already been through a robust examination several times. Any site which was deemed to be of a high landscape value and high landscape sensitivity was not allocated. And we have a map E on page 39, those of you who have your Bible with you, shows the areas that are not allocated. And they're not allocated deliberately because they have high landscape value and high landscape sensitivity. And this was double checked when HDA did their assessment for us. So they are protected against development under policy FNP 10. Map, as I say, map E on page 39 shows the areas that are allocated as having both high sensitivity and high landscape value. We didn't allocate any sites below 0.2 hectares. They are coming forward as windfalls. We have a different windfall policy from the rest of the borough. In order to proceed to referendum, the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan had to conform to the strategies in Local Plan Part 1. It would not have passed basic conditions had it not done so. And I felt the officer's report was disappointing in its knowledge of the function of the built-up area boundary. As I said, we fully comply with SP1 and SP2 and all the other policies, because the FNP does concentrate 3005. It makes a bigger allocation than the 2780, which was the minimum, 3005 dwellings. And these sites are on greenfield and brownfield sites that were allocated during the early process and then the review process. And the built-up area boundary has been drawn around the development sites. So if you look at the map, which is also in the local plan, you will see that it goes round Coxbridge, round the developments of Badshot Lee. It goes round. So the built-up area boundary is a revised boundary to delineate very clearly what is an acceptable area as far as the town is concerned for development, and outside that revised boundary, priority is given to protecting the countryside, and that's from inappropriate development, and that is the whole point of policy FNP 10. The officer's report, and indeed one of the public speakers, makes a case for the site which, as far as I'm concerned, flies in the face of the will of the people of Farnham. They selected the sites, they've been out on the streets, they have been voting for this plan. Their sites are approved by the people of Farnham. However, the final paragraph on page 29 does go on to say that the site does not comprise an allocated site from Plan Part 1 or draft over Plan Part 2. I think Catherine raised this earlier, and under the policy of the policy 14 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. So we selected the sites as we were allowed to do. We were allowed to do it under the Localism Act 2012, which stated very clearly that as long as we allocated enough sites for to comply with the borough's strategy, then we could choose where we put those houses. And that is in the Localism Act, which is the whole reason we got involved in the neighbourhood plan. So it brings me then to the crux, really, I suppose, of the decision making tonight. We all know the borough hasn't got a 5-year housing land supply, and we all know that therefore the tilted balance is engaged. But we also know that Section 36 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, which Councillor Edmonds has already raised, lays down the principle that the decision on planning applications to be governed by the development plan read as a whole, unless the material considerations. So we have already built into the system a primacy, if you like, of the statutory development plan over the MPPF. The officers have concluded, and I think wrongly in this case, that the tilted balance automatically leads to grant of planning permission. I don't think that's what Mr. Justice Holgate clarified at all. He stated quite clearly, several times in his reasoning, that the tilted balance in favour of development does not overcome the requirement to take a development plan-led approach to site selection. That's what he said in his ruling. So basically, the MPPF cannot displace the primacy given by the presumption in Section 38 to the statutory development plan. It is a balance, and I accept it's a balance, and we've got to work out which causes harm, which causes benefit. But the policies of the MPPF, including the tilted balance, do not have the force of statute. And they have to be understood in the context of a development plan-led system. And that was the point he was making. And a lot of developers were very upset because they thought that he had weakened the position, if you like, for tilting balanced. But given the promises in the Localism Act of 2012 that residents would be able to decide where development would best be situated, I really cannot understand how the allocations of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan can be tossed aside when they are fully compliant with the demands of SP2, Local Plan Part 1, and this application is contrary to so many local plan Farnham Neighbourhood policies, FNP1, FNP10, FNP14, RE1, just to name a few. And I feel, I'm sorry, that this has to be refused. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Martin, here, and then Councillor.
Oh, no, okay. I think Carol said it.
I said Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. As some of you know, I've only lived in Farnham for 10 years. And I've had two jobs, one in Farnborough, where I didn't used to commute into Farnham, but for 4 years I did commute into Farnham. And I used to drive along this road into town in the winter, and in the summer over across Farnham Park to my job in the town centre. So I know this road really well and know traffic really well. I remember sitting there one day in December and looking over to the field and seeing that the horses were up to their calves in water. And they were up to their calves in water the next day as well. And then on the third day, they were taken away. Admittedly, there were other problems with the flooding in Farnham. So having horses standing in water for 2 days possibly wasn't the worst thing in the world. But it did lead me to think about the flooding on this particular field and to look more carefully at what is said in this document by the officers. Now, since, so I had looked up, there have been 2 major floods in Farnham in the time I've lived there. There's one in 2013 and one in 2019. And because of my jobs, I know the one I saw was in 2019 when the horses were up to their knees in the water. I've also had a look at what is our policy. Farnham has actually got, Waverley has got 2 new policies that have come into place regarding flooding in recent years. We have policy CC4, which is to do with flooding, which says that all areas where there's either flood risk 1, 2 or 3 should be submitted to a sequential test unless the test has been undertaken by the local authority, and it may also be taken to an exception test unless that's been taken by the local authorities. Now in 2020, Waverley did undertake a number of sequential tests, but this was only for sites that have been allocated for development. So this test has not had the sequential test that's required when an area has a level 2 flood zone. Now in the document that we've got before us, it said, oh, there's only a little bit of flood 2 and there's only a little bit of the stream flood 3. So do you know what? We'll just call this flood 1 and we won't do any other tests on the site. So neither the sequential test as required under our policy 64 nor the exception tests have been applied in this case. Now you might think, okay, the officers have made a case that there's only a small amount of land which covers either flood 1, 2 or 3. But however, there have been reports written about floods in 2013 and 2019. I'd like to read this excerpt that came from a report from Farnham Town Council. Farnham Parks. The drains and sewers were unable to cope with the volume of water inundated parts of the park, with sewage and pollution heading down the Narda stream. The Waverley Borough Council Farnham Park Ranger reports each incident and over a 4-year period, and they have been happening far longer than just 4 years. And there's a sewage pipe inspection cover overflows in the time of high rainfall, and in times of very high rainfall, the outflow is a fountain of up to 5 feet high and discharges into the Narda stream. Reporting is the environmental agency who then passes the Thames Water to the clean-up of debris. Friends of Farnham Park, Farnham Rivers Group, Farnham River Management Committee have all made attempts to find details of what is being done. Currently awaiting details from this incident reporting system. Initial reports say there have been 9 incidents of flooding with sewage and discharges into the Narda stream since 2013, but significant underreporting as indirect reports know that the environment staff would not result in every incident being referred and entered into the database. So I do believe that based on this report from Farnham Town Council, we can conclude that there is a very serious risk of flooding coming from the Narda stream, and therefore the requirements under our policy C34 should be applied in full. I've also had a look at the conditions on biodiversity which have been put against this application, and they are quite light. In condition 14, we've laid out some of the ecological mitigation and management plans, but they are lighter and do not reflect what has been tasked us supposed to do by the Surrey Wildlife Trust. Surrey Wildlife Trust has specifically said that we need suitably qualified ecologists to ascertain the biodiversity net gain. We also need a migration strategy, a full reptile migration strategy for the full great-crested newt, and also a construction environment management plan and a sensitive lighting plan. None of those, the only one of those 4 items which is included in condition 14 is sensitive lighting plan. So this is an area of fantastic biodiversity. I know from having walked through Farnham Park every 3 or 4 times a week for at least 7 years that there is a lake on the corner of this site going through and free flowing water. So there is an immense biodiversity on this site and overflowing from Farnham Park. So I think therefore condition 14 should be much stronger than what it is at the moment, without which we cannot protect our neighbourhood. So on those 2 issues, I do not think the office has correctly assessed the flood risk based on reports we've had from Farnham Town Council. I do not believe the conditions which to do with biodiversity are anywhere near strong enough. But obviously the main arguments to do with this are the fact that, as stated by my colleagues Floyd and Carol Coburn, that we should refuse because it's outside the boundary. There's excessive amounts of housing in the area, and this is an area of great sensibility. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Lewis, I believe you want to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I just know that members have spoken about the Gladman judgment, so thought it might be worth just providing a few words about that and maybe clarify a couple of points. I think members are right in thinking that the judgment did clarify that an assessment under paragraph 11, in which the adverse impacts are assessed against the benefits, can include consideration of the development plan policies. So that's what the officers have done in their report, and we are assessing this application in line with what Justice Holgate said in that case. He also clarified that the decision makers should keep in mind the statutory primacy of the development plan and the statutory requirement to have regard to the other material considerations found in the NPPF, such as the tilted balance, which is relevant in this case. And I just thought it was worth clarifying that that officers haven't automatically concluded that permission should be granted simply because the tilted balance applies. They've gone through an assessment in which they've considered what harm arises from the conflicts with the development plan and the NPPF, and have concluded ultimately that that harm is significantly and demonstrably outweighed by the benefits. And they've done that against the backdrop of the planning history and the various decisions that have gone before it. So, as I say, they haven't just automatically recommended approval because the tilted balance applied or applies. They have gone through that assessment, which members should bear in mind when they come to their decision this evening. I hope that clarifies things a little bit. Thank you.
Ruth or Chris, do you want to add something? Ruth wants to add something.
Yeah, sorry. First is to reinforce what Lewis is saying, that I would hope from the officer's report that it was clear that we hadn't just automatically decided that this development should be approved, but had gone through at length through the appeal inspector's decision and Secretary of State's decision weighed up the conflicts and the benefits. And we have taken a lot of time and care over doing that. So that would be the first point. The second point, just in relation to ecology on condition 14, it does so under bullet point 1, it does talk about the application of the biodiversity metric version 3.1 to ensure that there is an ecological net gain on the site. And then over the page, it requires a full break-quested mitigation strategy and a full reptile mitigation strategy and a full bat mitigation strategy, along with various other things that would be required as well, along with an ecological mitigation and management plan. So I had felt that I'd incorporated all the requirements of Surrey Wildlife Trust within that condition.
Can I come back? Just because you haven't done the full migration plan for the breakfast food, and you haven't specified that you must have qualified ecologists to do this. So you haven't put in the construction environment management plan. So there were 3 elements.
Number 15 is the construction environmental management plan.
Okay, but
sorry, what was that? The full migration plan?
Yeah, the full reptile migration plan.
There's a full reptile mitigation strategy to include where reptile habitat will be advised on site, how this habitat will be managed, a carrying capacity assessment for the retained and created reptile habitat.
And it should be done by a suitably qualified ecologist.
That could be, I could certainly add that into that condition if the application is going to be approved. Sorry, just on the flooding aspect. So Foster's argued we've taken the right approach to this because dwellings are a more sensitive form of development. So you're right, if they were in flood risk zone 2 or 3, then we would have to do a sequential test. But actually, there is public open space that is in the northern part of the site, where you have that small part of flood zone 2 and then flood zone 3 along the Narda River. And taking into account the national planning guidance, amenity open space is effectively considered to be water compatible. So on that basis, we considered it was acceptable to have that open space in that location, and sequential tests didn't need to be done. And just, one final point, and it is about the location of the development. So in terms of the fact that it's outside the built-up area boundary, the appeal inspector and the Secretary of State were clear that that was contrary to policy, and that should be accorded some weight. However, when it comes to whether it's in a sustainable location, which is a slightly different issue, they both concluded that the location of the development was sustainable. That helps clarify that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Having patiently read all this, I agree with what people say, but a statistic that leapt out at me when I was counting things up, there were 88 letters of objection, I believe, which is quite astonishing, and only one that was really a neither. It didn't specify one way or the other, and that's 88 letters of objection from local people, so that seriously must be taken into consideration. Thank you.
And yes, do you want to answer that?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify that you must consider the details of the application, and neighbour objections are relevant so far as the detail that they contain, but the overall number is not necessarily a reason to approve or refuse. You've got to consider the detail of the application. So to refuse because of a number of representations wouldn't be a planning reason. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there's a lot of technicalities with policies and tilted balances and one thing and another, and some very good cases have been made. And I think Councillor Coburn spoke very convincingly. However, cart before horse comes to mind here. Where the disposal of sewage is concerned, and 5-foot fountains of poo is not a very wholesome thing to behold or even think about. And so Thames Water have no objection, subject to a condition that details to confirm that foul water capacity exists off-site to serve the development, or that the development and an infrastructure phasing plan is agreed with the local planning authority in consultation with Thames Water prior to the commencement of development. Now, just supposing we were to grant outline planning approval tonight, we're then very much in the hands of Thames Water coming up with the correct proposals to dispose of sewage. We've got the similar situation, Coxbridge Farm. And we're asked to make a decision to approve in outline 65 homes for which we now, at this point where we're asked to make a decision, have no guarantee that there will be proper disposal of sewage and that local rivers and watercourses won't be polluted. And it's not acceptable, in my view, that we are put in a position as a committee to have to take a decision which will be binding if we were to approve it tonight. That will be that, bound. It'll only be then detailed planning to follow, but we have no assurance. And I know that the water treatment works at Water Lane are already, and have been for quite a long time, several years, tankering away effluent, if that's the right word. They're tankering it away because the facilities there are not up to the job. And we keep building houses. We are going to be populating those houses with people, and they are human, and they will need to use toilets, and they will create sewerage. And what are we doing? We're just going to keep pushing this volume, this additional volume, down an untested network. We've got no assurance from Thames Water at this point now, where we really should have it. The same with Coxbridge. That will be coming up again, that we have no assurance, and we should have assurance. We do not want our rivers and watercourses polluted, not with human excrement or any other sort of pollution, surely. And when they bang on about sustainability, if that's not sustainable, please tell me what is. We have no assurance. We're supposed to rely on an infrastructure phasing plan agreed with the local planning authority, which we will not be privy to, by the way. We won't be there. It'll be done behind closed doors with Thames Water. What assurance have we got? I'm not happy with that. It's cart before horse, as before, and it just seems to be same old rubbish. You know, it's like Surrey Highways. They think that the highway network won't be affected by another 65 houses, which is probably 130 cars, loads of Amazon and supermarket delivery vehicles in and out onto what we already know is a very congested choke point, has been for years, as I said earlier. And yet we're supposed to sit here and blithely accept all these professional opinions that it's all going to be okay on the night. And that when all the developments are built, we won't just totally seize up because there's no plans to improve the infrastructure in any meaningful way. It's not good enough. It really is not good enough. And I urge my fellow colleagues to consider that very carefully, because we're sleepwalking into a very, very poor situation for Farnham. Thank you, Chair.
Bruce?
Sorry, yeah, if I can just come back on that point, that Thames Water, as the infrastructure provider, are legally required. They are legally bound.
Yeah. Yes, but all over this country, water authorities are putting effluent into watercourses.
Finish. Finish.
Sorry, but that is a fact. They are polluting our watercourses. Maybe legal requirement, but that's a fact. They are polluting our watercourses. They are.
Yes, sorry, no. So
Sorry.
No, that's fine, and I completely understand what you're all saying. But for the purposes of considering this application, we can't. Well, I certainly can't justify a reason for refusal on the basis that water authorities are polluting water courses across the country. All I can tell you is that they are legally required to deliver that infrastructure, and we are of the view that this condition adequately secures the infrastructure to be provided if it is needed in advance of the development being occupied. And it is a condition that we've used before. I know you've had concerns about it on Coxbridge Farm. We feel that this condition is robust in combination with the fact that under other legislation they're required to deliver the infrastructure.
Right, as a new item, McKenna.
Just a thing. I also have a question for sustainability of this application. There is an attitude at the moment that a road at full capacity, additional traffic doesn't make it any worse. However, the cumulative effect on the road network is significant. The National Planning Policy Framework covers on the cumulative effect of development. Paragraph 47 states, planning law requires that applications for planning permission be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The development plan fails to include this site. Paragraph 49 states, however, in the context of the framework and in particular the presumption in favour of sustainable development, arguments that applications premature are unlikely to justify a refusal of planning permission other than in the limited circumstances where both A, the development proposed is so substantial or its cumulative effect will be so significant that to grant permission would undermine the plan-making process by predetermining decisions about the scale, location or phasing of a new development that are central to a emerging plan. Paragraph 111 states, development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. Taking these matters together on this application, the impact would be substantial and severe. Thank you.
Now, I know thinking it was easy, but I mean, we must respect actually when the officers are answering the question, they must be allowed to answer the question. Now, is it something new, Councillor Edmonds?
Sorry?
Is it something new?
No, it's just a point of order.
What's the point of order?
Legally bound does not mean that it's feasible. Thank you.
Okay, right, okay, anybody else? I think, no, unless it's something new, shall it, Councillor Dixon?
Just want to say, I'm one of the local councils that knows there really well, and we've got a report from Barnham Town Council saying that that field floods a lot, quite seriously. Is the officer allowed to ignore that? Because she's just said, oh, we're going to call it flood zone 1, and it's not.
No, I don't know it. I mean, Richard Cooper, just like one, Richard Cooper.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah. I just wanted to cover off with, I did send an email to Ruth earlier, just wanted to amend 2 of the highway conditions, securing the highway works, to strengthen those conditions, to explicitly refer to the works needing to essentially improve highway drainage. So, and I couldn't see that on update sheet. So I'm just giving a verbal update that if members do decide to grant consent, please could those revised highway conditions be included?
Sorry, if I could just come back on the flooding point, that has not been determined by me what flood zone it is. That's determined by an EA flood map, effectively. So it's not those flood zones aren't my judgment. I just want to clarify that.
According to our climate change policy 4, if there is flood zone 3 and flood zone 4, 2 on a site, it should go under these different tests, additional tests. And what you do say in your document is, oh, it's only a small area and stream doesn't really matter. And so you're not putting it through the requirements of our own climate change, obviously, for flooding.
Right. Yeah. Bruce, one final point.
They are not the words that I have used in my report, and I have not said the stream doesn't matter. I've given it full consideration, and I've accounted for the fact that within the planning policy guidance, open space is considered to be compatible with watercourses. And so it's on that basis that I've made the judgment, and therefore a sequential test isn't required. So I'd just like to reiterate that I have not.
Ruth has answered your question.
Policies from councillors might be
Yes.
required.
Is that a box consideration, this application? And I find it upsetting people are saying that it hasn't. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think. I do think that we just need to make sure that we're directing the questions in a correct way. This is an officer. This is a council's team recommendation, not an officer recommendation. We need to make sure that we are allowing officers to respond. I know. Thank you, Chair, for raising that. I think also you really do need to be aware that you've got these two appeal decisions that are highly material, and in addition to that, things like sustainable, whether it's a sustainable location, whether there are highways concerns, whether a number of the things that you're raising, like the Thames water issues, those are all things that were not grounds for refusal of the previous schemes. So yeah, we've given a lot of consideration. It's a very difficult recommendation to bring to you, but the tilted balance does apply, and for those reasons, and not disregarding policy, which is what we've been quite clear we haven't disregarded the planning policies. We're recommending approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right.
I'd like to apologise to Ruth for putting too much pressure on earlier.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Ruth.
The officer.
Right. Andy McFly, do you want to sum up your last 4 minutes before we go to the vote?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I need 4 minutes to sum up. I said at the beginning that there'd been good contribution from the objector, particularly Catherine Powell and Councillor Hyman, as usual, made a very interesting contribution as well. There've been a lot of very good contributions from the floor, particularly Councillor, all councillors probably shouldn't pick it, but particularly Councillor Coburn made a very strong and powerful case against it. I'd just like to say to Ruth actually that I understand fully why she has to talk about the benefits in terms of the way it's regarded by the government and by the planning inspectorate, that any housing is seen by the government and planning inspectorate as a benefit. But in Farnham, we don't necessarily see this particular application as a benefit, because it won't actually benefit Farnham as such. But technically, Ruth is correct in what she's saying, and I'm sorry, like everybody else, if Ruth's been upset by this thing, and I'm sure no one, we fully respect Ruth as a professional, and no one wants to upset her. So that's all I want to say, Chairman. Thank you very much.
We'll move to recommendation then. Recommendation A. Subject to the completion of Section 106 agreement to secure SAM and SAM contributions, provision of 40% for affordable housing, setting of a market and affordable housing mix, provision of travel vouchers, provision of SUDs and public open space along with their management and maintenance, subject to conditions and informed this permission be granted, and linked to that is the recommendation B, as in the event of the requirements of recommendation not met, permission be refused. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against? So the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So that's none in favour, 10 against and no abstentions. So therefore the application has been refused.
Right. We need an alternative recommendation then. Which is, Councillor Coburn. Right, second of that. Councillor Leonard, just pick your Councillor Martin there. Right, the reasons for the refusal?
Despite the engagement in the filtered balance, the harms still, I think, this application is contrary to so many policies in both the local plan part 1 and the Farnham neighbourhood plan that the harms of this development, given that Farnham has made allocation for 3,005 homes, that the harm of this particular development outweighs the benefits. Yeah.
I'll second that.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I understand some of what's in there. I think we might need to be specific about what those harms are. So are you talking about harms in terms of the location of housing outside of the boundary and things like countryside, or are you what are you talking about as those harms? I think we need to understand.
I'm talking about the general policy FNP1 and TD1, which is design of any design, and in that incorporates sustainability and everything else. But the two key policies that I think this has to outweigh the benefit are FNP10 and FNP14. And I suppose RE1, which also comes into this, because the whole point of the built-up area boundary, and I hope I didn't, give the impression I was being rude to any particular officer, because I always put an S on officers when I'm speaking. But the built-up area boundary complies fully with the spatial strategy of local plan part 1, and that is my difficulty with this. The revised built-up area boundary is drawn around the allocations, including all the greenfield ones and the brownfield ones. And that is done deliberately so that we can see where the line is between the land we want to protect under policy FNP10 and the land that is acceptable within the built-up area boundary. We don't restrict development within the built-up area boundary at all. That's done on a site-by-site basis. So I cannot see, and the inspector and the Secretary of State said that this was contrary to FNP1, to FNP10 and FNP14, three key policies in the neighbourhood plan. As far as I can see, it's contrary to TT1, RE1 and RE3 of the plan part 1 as well.
Okay, Chris?
1 second, we just.
Okay.
I would say everyone's design. Chair, what we're looking at is whether FNP1 is actually applicable to the kind of outline scenario. So we think it might be more design based. We've obviously got the FNP reference to FNP10, FNP14. The query we've got about FNP1 is whether that's actually more detailed design.
Yeah, because it was mentioned somewhere in the your report and the inspector where.
So I think FNP, because there is a reason for refusal related to cramped and crowded, potential cramped and crowded.
Yeah.
The development could potentially be cramped and crowded as a result of the number of houses, but that really fell away through the Secretary of State's decision and the appeal decision. And FNP1, to my mind, really talks about less about the principle and more about when you're designing the development, and it is called design of new development and conservation. I wouldn't necessarily apply it when we're talking about a national principle.
Yeah.
There's an FMP, Farnham neighbourhood plan mention about infrastructure.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Chair, if I say.
Yeah, go on.
So FNP1D, I mean, I appreciate it is largely design policy, but FNP1D does reference, I think it's D, oh, sorry, put my glasses on. It's FNP1E, says that development should be well integrated into the landscape. So I think for that, on that basis, we will include FNP1 within it.
So what about the LH1 in the local plan part 1?
Oh, the location.
I found what I was looking for, Chairman, on page 26.
Housing allocation, sorry.
Oh, sorry, no, sorry. Speaking across, I do apologise. So through the
Yes, it's Ruth.
Right, my view on the LH1 is, well, A, that's kind of really a policy to sets out the housing expectations, but also it talks about allocating a minimum number of new homes. So I don't think you could refuse it on that basis because it's not setting a maximum. I would stay clear of that.
Yeah, yes,
I'll just reiterate that is very consistent with a number of appeals we've had where LH1 has been referenced. It's been something that hasn't been successful in that regard.
Well, I've got some words.
Can I come back, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sure.
I've actually found it, I was looking at.
Ah, okay.
On page 26, the decomposed conclusion of the Secretary of State. Obviously, circumstances have changed in a different way. But he said moderate weight against the proposal, as concluded by the inspector, to be attached to the conflict with FMP1, FMP10, RE1 and RE3, and you had read it somewhere. So he does raise FMP.
Yeah, you happy with me too? Yeah, yeah, we've got. So I think there are kind of two general areas that we've covered. So I've got two reasons here. So the first one is more to the principle. So the proposed development is not considered an appropriate location for housing as it lies outside of the built-up area boundary of Farnham in the countryside beyond the greenbelt and not allocated sites in the development plan, contrary to policies FMP10, FMP14 of the Farnham neighbourhood plan and policies RE1 of the local plan part 1. Then the second is more to do with some of the other detail that you referred to in terms of the proposed development result in harm to the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside beyond the greenbelt, the area of landscape value and the area of high landscape value sensitivity due to its urbanising impact and harm to the character of the landscape, contrary to FMP10, FMP14 of the Farnham neighbourhood plan, or see RE1 of local plan parts 1 2018, and we'll see FMP1 and FMP10 and 14. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Nothing?
I think so, but I'm getting a bit worried now about what we can and can't say. But this development will physically erode the gap in the countryside between Farnham and Cheshire, and that's been one of the reasons that we have wanted to keep it. So we do want to try and preserve the gaps between them.
I'm pretty sure that's covered off by both the appeal inspector and Secretary of State, well, particularly the appeal inspector. I don't know if I'll be able to find them right, but I'm sure he effectively says there is no issue of coalescence, and it isn't something that is brought through into the Secretary of State's decision either in terms of finding any harm in that respect. So I would steer clear of that.
You have some words then? If you repeat what you.
Read it again.
Yes, please, yes, read again and then we can read.
So, you sure you want me to read it once?
Read again, please.
The principle of development, so the proposed development is not considered to be an appropriate location for housing as it lies outside of the built-up area boundary of Farnham in the countryside beyond the Greenbelt and is not allocated sites in the development plan, contrary to policies FMP 10, FMP 14 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan and policy RE1 of the Local Plan Part 1 2018. And I think, is that where we have it from one? Or do you think yeah. The second one is more landscape based, and the proposed development would result in harm to the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside beyond the greenbelts and the area of great landscape value and area of high landscape value and sensitivity due to its urbanising impact and harm to the character of the landscape, contrary to policies FMP 10, FMP 14 of the Neighbourhood Plan, policy RE1 of the Local Plan Part 1 and also, sorry, FMP 1 as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Can we vote on that? Right. Those in favour? Please raise your hand. Those against?
Thank you, Chairman. So that's 10 in favour, none against and no abstentions.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we'll need a bit of a 5-minute break. Just so everybody down.
I'd love to.
I know, hang on. Come on over here. I suppose when you like me, you get used to looking from like this.
It's so hard work. It's always you must so hard.
No.
It's very, very short, which is no problem. Yeah.
Chairman, could you turn the audio off, please?
Sorry, Councillor Hyman?
Could you turn the audio off at the moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, 5 minutes is not so we move on to our second public speaking item tonight, which is WA 2021-01986, the land at 4 Wicket Hill, Farnham, and the erection of a dwelling with integral garage, demolition of extension to existing dwelling, and demolition of existing garage and shed. Councillor Bishop, do you wish to yeah.
Exit.
Yes, Councillor Bishop.
Just one of your neighbours.
Oh.
We won't forget you, we'll come and rescue you. Right, okay. And the officer to present is Lara Davison. Lara, your turn.
Thank you, Chair. I have one verbal update just to confirm that the appropriate assessment has been reviewed by Natural England, who've confirmed they've raised no objection, and that response has been uploaded to the website this week. This application seeks permission for the erection of a detached dwelling with an integral garage and the demolition of the existing extensions and garage and shed at 4 Wicket Hill. The application site is outlined in red on the above location plan, with the existing plot sizes shown access from Wicket Hill. The application site is located in the developed area of Farnham. Here is an aerial photograph of the site, with Battenball Lane located to the north and Sandrock Hill Road located to the south. The Battenball Public House is located to the east. This slide provides the proposed block plan of the new dwelling, which follows the existing building line of the dwellings located along this side of Wicket Hill. This slide provides a more detailed site plan of the proposed scheme, which highlights the separation distances between the neighbouring dwelling through Wicket Hill, which is located to the southeast of the application site. Here are some site visit photographs. The top left photo shows the front elevation of 4 Wicket Hill and the associated hard standing provision for parking to the front of the existing dwelling. The top middle photograph is taken to the rear of Wicket Hill, of 4 Wicket Hill, and the top right hand side photograph is taken looking towards the proposed site of the dwelling. The bottom left hand photograph is taken looking up Wicket Hill, with the application site visible on the left hand side beyond the existing hedging. The middle bottom photo is taken looking towards the side elevation of 4 Wicket Hill, and thus this would face the proposed dwelling. The bottom right hand side photograph shows the existing garage and store, which is proposed to be demolished within the scheme. Here are some further site visit photographs with miniature block plans shown to either side, demonstrated by the blue star, which dwelling you're looking towards. This slide is to demonstrate that there's a varied character and style of dwellings within Wicket Hill, and as such, the modern design that you see wouldn't appear at odds within the existing street scene. This slide provides the proposed elevations. The bottom left elevation would face 3 Wicket Hill, and the bottom right elevation would face 4 Wicket Hill. The proposed design, as you can see, would be of a modern construction with balconies provided as private amenity space for future occupiers. This slide shows the floor plans of the proposed dwelling. It would comprise 4 bedrooms spread across 2 levels with an integral garage and open plan kitchen and diner. This slide shows the existing elevations of 4 Wicket Hill, which is to be retained. The small office here and the garage and store to be removed, which will be demonstrated on the next slide. As you can see, a small area of the extension has been removed, and I've provided a comparison of these two here. So as you can see, that the dwelling remains mostly the same apart from the removal of those extensions. This slide shows the proposed section with 3 Wicket Hill shown on the left and 4 Wicket Hill shown on the right hand side. The proposed dwelling would be located on a significantly sloping land levels, and as such would appear single storey when seen from 4 Wicket Hill. This is demonstrated by the ridge height on this elevation facing 4 Wicket Hill being the proposed dwelling and 4 Wicket Hill would have the same ridge height. It is acknowledged that the proposed dwelling would sit at higher land levels than 3 Wicket Hill. However, there is a 9-metre separation distance proposed between the flank elevation of the proposed dwelling and the shared boundary with 3 Wicket Hill. The key matters for consideration are the impact on design and visual amenity and the impact on residential amenity. Officers consider that the provision of a dwelling in this location is in accordance with the development plan and are recommending approval of the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Laura. We have 2 public speakers on this item. This one is Hugh North, and there's been a circulated paper of these objections. Hugh, you're online, I believe, is that right?
Yes, I am. Good evening, Mr. Chair and fellow members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for the opportunity of talking. You all have paper copies, I believe, is that correct?
Yes, we do. 4 minutes, Mr. North.
Okay, fine. Basically, I am one of a number of objectors and representing basically others who include Farnham Town Council, councillors, the Bourne Conservation Group, Badger Protection Group, as well as numerous residents. Both the Bourne Conservation Group and Badger Protection Group have actually, I believe, seen the site, whereas the Surrey Wildlife Trust hadn't. The 4 items I'd like to discuss or attend to are basically housing density, the impact of overdevelopment, the threats to nature conservation, and in that context, the unreliable nature of the ecology report, and essentially non-compliance with the Farnham Design Statement and Neighbourhood Plan Policy. With regard to the housing density, basically the applicants asserts in the Design and Access Statement that the application proposal fits in with the pattern of surrounding development and that the proposal continues the rhythm of development along Wicket Hill. We believe this to be an inaccurate and misleading statement, and if you actually look at the map on the right, you can clearly see that all the dwellings that are currently in place have at least between 12 and 20 metres between them, and that the 4 dwelling and the proposed dwelling will in fact only have about 4.5 metres between them. So I think it's a little disingenuous to actually make that statement. Another statement they make basically regards the environmental implications of the development, and that requires the council to have regard to the environmental implications. And again, we believe this is a misleading statement. Basically, included within the proposed dwelling area is the underground nature reserve. This is a reserve that essentially is to the southeast of the proposed dwelling, but it extends to all intents and purposes via a sort of a wooded area all the way up Wicket Hill in the back gardens of 4, 4A, 5 and 6. And this is a really important nature reserve, which I'll talk about in a minute. In terms of the overdevelopment, basically in the past 20 years, there have been 4 houses that have been built to infill gardens in Wicket Hill, including in fact 4A, which was part of 4 some 13 years ago. Basically, this has taken the number of houses from 6 in the road to 10. And I guess the question is that, when is enough enough? I think people believe that this is a stretch too far and is going to have, significant impact and doesn't basically fulfill any particular benefits except the pocket of whoever lives in number 4. I'll talk about the amenities, but essentially, as was touched on earlier, there are going to be 7 to 9 windows that look towards 3 to the southeast, whereas there's only 1 that actually looks towards house 4. Another important issue is the existing drainage infrastructure, which is really critical. Basically, every time that there is a house developed in this road, there seems to be in the area to the north of Wicket Hill in the road, a drain basically that goes into number 1 Baton Ball.
30 seconds, Mr. North.
Sorry?
30 seconds left, Mr. North.
Okay. We also, there's an issue with traffic and basically construction vehicles. Basically, there's nowhere to accommodate these without material impact in the residents. Of really importance is this issue that there are 2 badger entrances within 10 metres of the proposed dwelling. These entrances are located in a scarp. Basically, it's inconceivable that the badger runs do not run directly to where the house is due to be built. There's no... Pardon?
Your time's up, Mr. Norris, I'm afraid. We have all got the... we got your... sheet, so you can have a address. The other issue is Michael Connolly, who I believe is here. Yes. You have 4 minutes too, Mr. Connolly.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, councillors and officers. I'm only going to address the issues that have been raised by the objector. First of all, I think some background is necessary. Mr. North is a developer himself, and he has recently had consent granted for 3 houses in his previous garden. He also lives in one of the new houses on that road. The next item, I've been involved in either the extension or design of the new buildings, all of the new buildings on that road. So I think that comes up to something like 5 or 6 out of the 11. And my firm's been involved with carrying out drainage for this. We've had no difficulty with the drainage with any of them, and all of them drain properly that we've been involved in. Also, the drainage in the road goes in 2 different directions, and therefore I'm unaware of issues at the top. In terms of overdevelopment, I think if one looks at the site plan, one will be able to see quite easily that out of the 11 houses on the road, the plots, there are 5 plots which are smaller than the site, including Mr. North. And also, I would note that the 3 plots immediately to the rear of the site are also substantially smaller. So in summary, from the 14 plots most closely visually related to the site, 8 are smaller than the site, and some substantially so, and only 6 are larger. Clearly, this is not overdevelopment or town cramming. With regard to highways, the Surrey County Council Department of Highways are the consultee for this, and they raised no objection with the increase in traffic. Concerns about developing the site, as we've been involved with a number of new houses on that road, we can put in measures to actually facilitate turning and provide a construction management plan to ensure that things are carried out in a proper and reasonable manner. With regard to the ecology, Surrey Wildlife Trust, who are very vigilant in preserving the wildlife of Surrey, but Farnham in particular, have checked through the preliminary ecological assessment which was submitted, and they have no issue with it. These are the professionals and comments which are made just off the cuff, saying that the house is being put into a nature reserve, that there is a area protected land close to the site, but the house is not in it, and that area can be sectioned off and properly protected as by condition, protective fencing or whatever measures the local authority consider necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Councillors, anybody wish to speak? I can't say anything, I do apologise.
I've got a question with regards to the amount of glazing in this property. From the one of the photographs, I don't seem to be extremely excessive. And the other question I've got is why there is no restriction on building hours? There's restriction on HGV access, no restriction on building hours.
Margaret.
Thank you, Jeremy. We've put hours for, like you say, HGVs and the in the condition, but we haven't put general construction hours. We wouldn't often do it for smaller developments like household developments, but actually, given this is a single dwelling, it might, if members felt it appropriate, be proportionate to put an hours of construction condition on. So yeah, we could add that to.
On some, you impose construction hours, and others you don't. It's not a consistent policy. The other safety concern I got about access, the road looks quite narrow. Is it a dual track road or a single track road?
Single track.
Single track.
It is a single track road, but
then no way could I agree to this. Sorry.
but as it has been raised, there has this
Excuse me.
the application has been reviewed by the County Highway Authority. Those comments are available online, and they have raised no objection and do not believe that it would result in material highway safety concerns. So I do think these comments need to be taken into account. We can add construction hours to the end of condition 4, or have it as a separate condition if members would like to add that condition at the end. Thank you, Chair.
Any other councillors wish to speak on this? Yeah, Councillor Hess.
Can it be clarified whether there's any overlooking issues with the windows on the southeast elevation? Could you just clarify that?
Yeah, so there are. I don't know what's best to move up the site plan.
Yeah, we'll look at the site plan. We'll look at the site plan.
No, for the site plan back for the screen, okay.
What we do, can I just clarify one?
You should, please do.
Just one particular point of clarification. The obviously the neighbour, what they, in terms of whether they are, there was mentioned what they have history of developments or not. That's not a material consideration. Just yeah, it's yeah, we consider it as a neighbour concern to do any other neighbouring property.
So in answer to your question about the relationship with 3 Wicket Hill, I've got the site plan up on the screen now. As you can see, there is a fairly substantial separation distance. It has been taken into account that there are differing land levels between the proposed dwelling and 3 Wicket Hill. There is a condition, if I direct members to page 83 of your agenda pack, condition 3, the upper ground floor windows on that level are conditioned to be obscurely glazed. The ground floor windows aren't. There obviously is the provision of a balcony. Officers consider that, obviously, I'm just answering in relation to 3 Wicket Hill, but the private amenity space for 3 Wicket Hill is on the other side of the dwelling, and therefore taking into account the separation distance and the oblique views that it would offer, officers consider that this relationship is acceptable. If members are concerned about the balcony, there would be the option to add a screening condition at that level if you were minded to do so and didn't agree with the recommendation as it stands.
Looks like it's quite a
There's a margin.
big distance.
Is there a condition that the Underdown Nature Reserve will be protected? Is there a condition in here?
There are 2 conditions relating to ecology, which were suggested by the Wildlife Trust. These relate to a construction environmental management plan.
Are they specific?
They aren't specific as such, but they have
Condition.
and they have a more specific condition in relation to the Underdown Nature Reserve. So the main conditions, condition 8 and 9, about their first instances of such environmental management plan.
Those are conditions we have. Actually, I mean, if there are areas you think we should expand on, happy to do this, but those are the conditions we've had from the Wildlife Trust. So, what?
I think it'd be helpful to know exactly what condition, like the wording that you feel like hasn't been incorporated so far, and then we discuss whether that could be.
Thank you, Chair, for you.
That it should be touched. It's a nature reserve. And it's not specific in here. There's no it doesn't say anything about a nature reserve, that it can be fudged. I'm sorry. I think we need it to be more specific.
Just to confirm, we would consult the Wildlife Trust on any discharge condition. So if they felt that it didn't do what was needed in terms of the wider objectives, then yes, they would likely raise an issue. So I'm not an ecological expert myself. We would be relying on their advice.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes, I don't think helpful, but in North Farm in 2019. Sorry, do you want to say it?
No, that's not working. Speak up, please.
Yes, just I don't know if this is helpful at all, but 2019 in East End, there was a bungalow of Wellington Lane where the site was about 400 metres.
Sorry, I thought yes,
A
fine.
bungalow where the garden was about 300 metres square, and this committee gave permission for a second bungalow to be built. So we had one bungalow which is 92 metres square, second bungalow was 79 metres square, and both of them had gardens which were 100 metres square. I just mention this because the size of the new house is actually going to be 284 metres square, so that's bigger than the site in North Farm that was actually fit for two bungalows to be up. So, you know, I think we're not really in the large-scale development.
I just wanted to come back and support Councillor Martin. If I remember rightly, the Underdown Nature Reserve was gifted by Mrs. Underdown to the town on behalf, I think it was in memory of her husband. So, you know, it is an important little nature reserve, and I think if we can, I think that's been a real, the Bourne Conservation Group certainly have been very worried about it. It's a difficult reserve to access, but if we could put something in to protect it, obviously we should go to Surrey Wildlife Trust.
You want to comment on that, Chris? Laura?
Other than we will consult with the Wildlife Trust on those conditions.
It is managed, isn't it? But I think it is actually managed.
We're just discussing whether the provision of fencing would actually be more harmful than good. So we're just discussing what we could add at this stage of that.
Not unless it's sort of got big holes in all day long.
Do you have anything specific in mind?
No, it's just not to encroach on the nature and to keep the permeability for the. It is a corridor, you know, as much as a nature reserve, and certainly that was, I think, a lot of people's first fears when this came in, was to protect the nature reserve. As I say, it was gifted. I'm sure it's Surrey Wildlife Trust. It was,
I think it's
manager.
Nobody else.
None of us speak? Okay. Right, now, just to clarify for me, Chris, are we adding any more conditions to this?
I think we added the standard construction hours condition as condition 12.
Right, okay, fine. Well then, shall we move to the recommendation? The recommendation is that subject to conditions, permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hands. Those against, so. So what's the score?
Thank you, Chairman. That's 9 in favour, 1 against, and no abstentions.
And the application is granted. Right, there's a move on rescue recognition.
Would you like, please, Councillor Dixon? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Fine. You find him, sorry?
Is this
Talking to the other gentleman in the corridor.
Okay.
Again.
Now, did you have your view? Thank you. Right. Okay. Moving now to applications not subject to public speaking. And the first one being WA 2021, 03062, land at St Paul's House, East Street, Farnham. The erection of an additional storey to provide 4 flats to existing 2-storey building together with associated works, and the officer is James Kidger.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this application is for the erection of additional storage to the building to provide 4 flats. You can see the location plan there with the site outlined red, East Street to the north, and car park to the south. We have an aerial shot here, the subject building with the blue eye dotted, 2 similar buildings to either side, just some wider context. Here we have a photograph of the site looking west along the East Street. The subject building sort of at the end of the row, sort of diminishing slightly into the distance there in the centre. And here are more close-up shots of the building. The subject building's in a slightly darker brick towards the end of the row. Shot with the frontage there, a bit more close-up. And here we have a shot looking east on East Street. The subject building in the foreground, the frontage diminishing background, and a slightly drawn out shot with context. Subject building in the slightly reddish brick on the left hand side. And this is the rear of the building, subject building in the centre, stood on the side roads in the rear, the public car park on the right hand side. And then shot from the other side of the car park, the subject building is actually hidden on that shot between the 2 projections. And you can see a slight mansard roof on the building in the foreground, albeit not at the same level as the proposal. So the proposed elevations, we would be adding a mansard style roof on the top there. That's the front elevation at the top of the screen, and the west elevation at the bottom, showing a small degree of setback. And then the rear elevation and the easterly elevation, again broadly corresponding with the opposing elevations. And the proposed floor plans for 1-bedroom flats, and the layout and window arrangement. So the key issues here, the design of the mansard roof and the consequent impact of the character of the area. The fact that the application does not provide dedicated parking, and whether the sustainability in the location outweighs that. And of course, again, the last 5-year housing land supply with the current engagement of the tilted balance.
Right. Well, actually, the ward council for the ward, Councillor MacLeod, has to speak on this item. So, Councillor MacLeod, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm Chair, thank you. I'd just like to make a few remarks, if I may, Chair. First of all, to point out the objection from the Town Council. The Town Council regards this development as overdevelopment of the site, and the bulk and the mass of being obtrusive and having a negative impact on the street scene. The Town Council is also concerned about the lack of parking. Obviously, the change of use application that is already in place doesn't have any parking, so it probably there's no way in which parking could be provided for the additional 4 flats. But one of the things the Town Council points out is that there's a similar situation in the Woolmead application where there was a reduced number of amount of parking provided, and And what happened there was a condition was applied that the flats without parking couldn't apply for parking permits within Farnham Town Centre controlled parking zone. And the Town Council requests that the committee consider imposing such a condition. The other thing I'd like to mention is in terms of cycle parking. I look back to the original application, and there is a provision for cycle parking within the the original application or the change of use application, but it's very unclear what's been provided, and I don't know whether or not the committee would consider that they would need to make it clearer what cycle parking should be provided if this application is improved, particularly bearing in mind that now they've moved towards electric cycles, and whether there should be cycle parking, it could provide provision for charging and that sort of thing. So that's my remarks, Chairman, and I'd just like the committees to consider the Town Council's objections, as I said at the beginning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, open to debate. Any councillor wish to speak? Right, Councillor Martin.
Can I put this on? Really what worries me is the lack of amenity space. There's already a planning application which has been approved for 8 flats downstairs, and this is an extra 4 on top. There is no amenity space within the curtilage of this building. If they want to be, I thought after COVID we would have learned that actually people need a little bit of outside space for their mental well-being, and this has none at all. I wish sometimes developers, instead of doing this huge mansard of a road, I'm thinking of profit and squeezing 4 flats in, which are only 30 foot by 10 foot each, would have put a green roof on, a green terrace, which would have been enjoyed by the other 8 flats, and would have been a net gain of biodiversity for our lovely town. Thank you.
Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. I thought we had an obligation to make sure that accommodation is suitable for disabled people. If that's not the case, I can't see. If that is the case, I can't see how this application is sustainable. I also agree with the Farnham Town Council objections. So on that basis, I couldn't support the application.
John James or Chris?
Sustainability.
Yes. We'll go to Councillor James first.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, surprisingly, I actually think it's an improvement in the street scene. I think the roof actually makes it actually, that one photograph that showed all the buildings with flat roofs, which looked like a factory almost, it might be an office block, but by actually putting a 3rd story with a mansard roof, different to other bits, same as the one opposite, actually improves the character because it's making it slightly different and a bit of visual change in the street scene. So I actually will be supporting the opposite. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, James.
Yeah, if you could just respond to the accessibility point, it's probably more of a building regulations matter, but I don't think we can compel them at this stage to provide a lift. And if I can just say, and apologies that I forgot to mention in the presentation, we have had a response from the Highway Authority just to confirm that they have no objection and there is an appropriate assessment available online to view, and the National England comment to the effect that they're satisfied with that.
Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Coburn.
Yes, I mean, I want to agree with Councillor Martin that I regret the lack of amenity space in an ideal world, but given what we have here, which is a very unprepossessing building, which has already got permission for 8 flats with no amenity space, I agree with Councillor James that actually putting on this extra there. We have a similar one in Hazelmere recently, which I supported. Because, you know, these old buildings where they are being reused, you know, you have to be imaginative about them. Yeah, pity about the amenity space. I am always worried when you maximise the development about the clutter, you know, the bins and the other bits and stuff. This is the bit that really worries me, rather than anything else, and I don't know how strongly we can put a provision for this, because, you know, people do what's easiest for them in the end. But I think in terms of, you know, given policy, given the fact that they've got permission for 8, I can't see that putting this extra floor on is actually going to be harmful in any way. So I also support the officer's recommendation on this one.
Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, I was driving past this the other day, and the thing that struck me is we have got some flats bit further down, and it will make that part of the road quite a dark corridor going up one level, but there is elevations on both sides. I think the thing is that one thing I can't find in the notes is, are these flats more than 72 square meters minimum? That was the other thing I was going to ask. And yes, the brickwork is incredible bricks. Are we sure that this building, I suppose there has been a survey to check that they can take the weight, additional weight on top of the building?
Yes, James.
I think that would be more of a building regulations issue on safety. And just to confirm that, yes, they do meet nationally described space standards.
Anyone else wish to speak? Right.
No, we need to take the chair.
No, thank you very much. All right, we'll move to the recommendation then. The recommendation is that subject to conditions, permission be granted. Please, those in favour, please raise their hands.
Thank you.
Against?
Thank you, Chairman. That's 3 in favour, sorry, 7 in favour, 3 against, and no abstentions. Therefore, permission is granted.
Move on to the last application tonight, which is WA 2022-000139, land at Brambers, Gracewood, Hazelmere. And it's Lara again. The erection of a single-storey, 2-bedroom dwelling with associated landscaping, parking and driveway. And it's Lara to begin. Lara, are you ready?
Chair. I have one verbal update to the application relating to the appendices that were originally provided. You'll notice an additional sheet on your table, which was a replacement to page 128 of the agenda pack. There was an error shown on the plan on the top of the page, which has now been corrected. As such, please disregard page 128 of your original agenda pack. This application proposes the erection of a single-storey, 2-bedroom dwelling within the residential parsonage of Banders in Hazelmere. The application has been previously refused at Western Committee, you may recall, on the 10th of August 2021 for the following 2 reasons. The proposed dwelling, by virtue of its size, scale, mass, design and location, would comprise an undesirable, cramped, contrived development of the site and would be detrimental to the character and appearance of the area by reason of its close proximity to the common boundary, in combination with its height and mass, would appear over-dominant and would therefore fail to comply with relevant policies. The second reason for refusal reads, the proposal, by reason of its size and siting, would result in an unacceptable loss of outlook, loss of privacy and overbearing to the adjoining property at Badgers and Bambers. The proposal would therefore conflict with the relevant policies which are set out in the agenda report. This slide shows the location plan of the site, which provides the Grayswood, the access is provided off the Grayswood Road to the southwest of the site. The access has been reviewed by the County Highway Authority and has raised no objection to the scheme or the previous scheme that was put before you last year. The application site is located within the developed area of Hazelmere. This slide shows you an aerial photograph of the site. The proposed siting for the dwelling located in the middle of the photograph, with the parking area of Badgers shown immediately adjacent to the northwest. Here is a block plan of the proposed scheme. The dwelling would be set back from the Grayswood Road, positioned in line with Bambers and Badgers. A parking area is provided within the road application sight line. As you travel up the access from the Grayswood Road, and with adequate private amenity space provided within the plot. Just for reference to 2021 scheme, this is the block plan which was refused by members. The differences between the current proposal and the one before you today is that there is a revised roof design, which includes the removal of the pitched roof, which therefore reduces the bulk and match and the ridge height of the scheme. There's a revised positioning within the plot, which moves the dwelling away from the boundary with badgers, and a reduction in the floor area of the proposed dwelling. Here are some site photographs. The top left and bottom right photographs are taken standing within the garden of bamboos, facing the front elevation of badgers. The top right photograph is taken from the Grayswood Road, facing the front elevation of bamboos, and the bottom left photograph is taken standing within the proposed application site. Here are some further photographs of the site, which shows a closer image of the front elevation of badgers, including, as you can see, the single-storey garage with a pitched roof on the which adjoins the adjacent boundary to the application sites. And the bottom two photographs show the rear elevation of bamboos and the single-storey outbuilding to the rear of the existing dwelling. Here are some comparisons of the previously refused and the current application. I've done this across the elevation so you can see what was previously put forward and what you'll be assessing today. The test for members is to see whether this application has overcome the previous two reasons for refusal. So this slide, at the top of the slide is the previous application, and the bottom of the slide is the current application. I would point out that the current scheme provides the background of badgers in the background, so as you can see, the ridge height would fall in line with the bottom of the windows which are in the roof, as you saw in the previous photographs. This slide which demonstrates the elevation which would face badgers. As you can see, it's single story and has a lower ridge height. If you go to condition 3, you can see that all these windows have been conditioned to be obscurely glazed. They are also at single story level. The reduction in ridge height from the previous scheme is from 5.3 metres to 3.6. This slide provides a comparison of the other side elevation, which would face Cranfield on the block plan. Sorry, Badger's driveway, and this would be the other side elevation, which faces Cranfield. This slide shows a site section, including the positioning of badgers and bamboos and how this would fit in relation to the new dwelling proposed. As you can see, there's a 26 metre separation distance between bamboos and badgers. There was an increased separation distance between badgers and the proposed dwelling, increased from 1.7 to 2.4 metres. Furthermore, there's been an increase along a 4 metre section of the rear elevation to 3.4 metres. These are a proposed floor plan comparison. On the left-hand side, you have the previous scheme, and on the right-hand side, you have the current application. As just pointed out, it has been pulled further away from the boundary, and these distances are set out within the relevant section of the officer report. So the key matters for consideration tonight, these are the two previous reasons for refusal, is whether you consider that the new application has overcome these reasons for refusal, and as set out in the officer report, officers are minded to approve the application subject to the relevant conditions.
Thank you very much. Right, open to councillors. Anybody wish to speak on this? Councillor Keane.
I'm just going to go and get some handkerchiefs. I'll be back in 2 minutes. As long as she said.
Yeah.
Can I do that? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, looking at the proposed the site, when you look at a lot of the sites around this, it is a smaller site, and it does still look to be cramped. I'm not quite so sure about the distance between Badgers and the new dwelling. So I'll listen to what other councillors have to say, but at this moment in time, I must say I'm not so very happy about the new design. Thank you.
All the councillors, any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor James.
Can I ask you to put the aerial view of the green? Because.
This one?
Yes, that one. So there's a big tree.
Yeah, so.
Well, that presumably has to come down.
So the tree protection plan highlights there are some trees to be removed. The tree officer has assessed the application and on balance, officers consider that the application is acceptable. There are 2 TPOs on site to the front and to the side. Those trees are to be retained in the proposal and not to be removed.
And can I just come back to, and at the moment, the on the previous, I think, photograph, it shows a wooden fence between I call the new badgers. So it's already, it hasn't got a hedge and the stuff there at the moment. It's got a wooden fence there, a wooden fence and no greenery at all. No.
Yes, the wooden fence that you can see in the top left-hand photograph is the shared boundary at the moment.
Yeah.
The front elevation of badgers and the rear elevation of badgers.
So there's no green hedging or anything between the two. Okay, that's fine. There's not trees.
Yes.
It all looks quite low. So can you confirm there are no overlooking issues with this?
I can confirm the whole dwelling is single story. So as you can see from the elevation comparison here, I think is quite helpful. You can see badgers behind, so the single story dwelling would fall below that. So it would be in line really. It would be slightly above the fence. But I think given that you can obviously see the garage positioned adjacent to the boundary, it would be difficult to object to a single story structure that is obviously adjacent to the shared boundary, but between that there is a garage and the parking area of that dwelling.
Yeah.
Anybody else for street? Right. We shall move to the recommendation therefore. Recommendation that subject to conditions, permission be granted. Those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against.
Sorry, could we slow it down to 4, please?
Four.
I didn't get in favour. Thank you.
Against.
Thank you.
Abstain. The result, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So that's 9 in favour, 1 against and no abstentions. Therefore, permission is granted.
There being no further items to discuss on the exempt items, meeting closed. I will remind everybody there is another meeting of the committee next Tuesday on the 28th at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much.